This means that his promises never fail, his character never wavers, and his power never diminishes. When he speaks, his words have the same impact today as they did at the beginning of creation. But here's something few people realize. If God is eternal and independent of creation, then he does not need us, yet he still chose us. He could have created a universe without life, without consciousness, without purpose. But he chose to create us in his image and likeness. This shows that he wants to relate to us, that he wants us to understand who he is. He is not a distant, cold or indifferent God. He is personal. He reveals himself. He calls. He wants us to draw near. If God exists beyond time and space, how can we connect with him? This question may seem complex, but the answer is surprisingly simple. God has always been revealing himself to humanity. He did not create us to wander in the dark, searching for him aimlessly. On the contrary, he left clear signs throughout creation, in our consciousness, and in history. The universe, with all its order and mystery, is a reflection of the Creator's mind. Our very ability to reflect on these questions is evidence that we were made to seek him. Have you ever noticed how the human soul has a thirst that nothing in this world can satisfy? People chase success, money, relationships, pleasures, and yet they always feel that something is missing. That's because we were created for something greater than what this world can offer. Our essence was made to be connected with God. And this connection does not happen through empty rituals or cold philosophical theories. It happens through faith, through a real experience with the Creator. But how do we strengthen this connection? First, by recognizing that faith is not a fleeting emotion, but a decision based on evidence. When you look at the universe and see its complexity, you are witnessing a reflection of God's mind. When you read the Bible and realize how its words transcend time with transformative power, you are seeing God speak. When you experience moments of peace in the midst of chaos, you are feeling his presence. Connecting with him is simpler than it seems. Seek him, study his words, talk to him in prayer, and you will realize that he has always been there. And the most remarkable thing, this connection is not something abstract, but real and tangible. People who draw near to God experience deep changes in their lives. Their fears decrease, their vision expands, their priorities shift. Faith enables us to see beyond the immediate, beyond difficulties, and gives us an unshakable certainty that we are part of a much greater plan. It's no coincidence that so many people who once lived without purpose, upon encountering God, discover a profound meaning for their existence. Now, the most important question, what will you do with this knowledge? Because understanding that God exists is one thing, but connecting with him is another. Knowing that there is a Creator is the first step, but walking with him transforms everything. God is always calling, always revealing himself, always waiting for us to draw near. And the decision to respond to this call is in your hands. Now that you have come this far, what does this truth mean for your life? Knowing that God has no origin, that he has always existed before time and space, changes the way we see everything around us. If the universe is not the result of mere chance, if there is an intelligent mind behind every detail of creation, then your existence also has a purpose. You are not here by accident. You are part of a much greater plan. But the biggest question is, what will you do with this knowledge? Because understanding that God is eternal is not enough. You need to connect with him. If he created the world with order and purpose, why would you continue living without clear direction? What is stopping you from diving into this truth and beginning to see life in a completely different way? If everything has an origin, then what is the origin of your faith? What drives you? What truly makes sense to you? Are you spending your Life on things that are temporary, while the creator of the universe is calling you to something eternal. God does not hide. He has always been speaking, always showing signs. The question is, are you listening? Now the choice is yours. Will you keep ignoring this call, or will you seek this connection that can transform your life? If this content resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because here we explore the deepest mysteries of faith and existence. Don't miss the chance to discover even more, because this is just the beginning. And this Creator not only gave us life, but made us in His image, with the ability to think, feel, and connect with Him. And the most incredible thing is that, even without fully understanding it, we accept the concept of energy without questioning its essence. You do not see electricity, but you know it exists because you feel its effects. You do not see gravity, but you know it is there because everything stays on the ground. Likewise, consciousness and the existence of God can be perceived by the effects they produce in the world. When a person connects with God, their mind changes, their thoughts change, their life changes. That's because the source of life is not just impersonal energy, but a personal being who desires to reveal himself to us. And here arises a fascinating point. If everything in the universe is so precisely interconnected, were time, space, and matter also created simultaneously? Is there a relationship between these three dimensions and the very nature of God? The answer to this could completely change our understanding of reality, and that is what we will explore next. Topic 8. The Trinity of the Universe. Have you ever noticed how the entire universe operates within a structure of three interconnected elements? Time, space, and matter are inseparable. One cannot exist without the other. If we had only space but no time, nothing could move or change. If we had matter without space, there would be nowhere to place it. And if we had time without matter, there would be nothing for it to affect. All three came into existence together at the moment of creation. This is not just a coincidence. It is a divine pattern that reflects the very nature of God. Time, for example, also has its own trinity, past, present, and future. They all coexist, yet they are different. Space also has three dimensions: height, width, and depth. And matter? It exists in three states: solid, liquid, and gas. It may seem like a small detail, but when we analyze it closely, it becomes clear that all of creation carries the mark of the Creator. If reality itself follows this structure, does that not suggest that God intentionally designed the universe with a specific pattern? And when we examine God's very identity, we find something astonishing. The Christian faith teaches that God is one in essence, but reveals himself in three persons: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. They are not three separate gods, but three expressions of a single divine reality. Just as time, space, and matter are different aspects of the same universe, the Trinity represents different manifestations of the same eternal God. When someone tries to understand God without considering this pattern, they end up falling into contradictions. Now think about this in practical terms. When you see a ray of sunlight, you feel the heat and see the light. These are three different elements, but they come from the same source. The sun, the light, and the heat are not separate. They are part of the same existence. Likewise, God cannot be separated from his own being. And just as time, space, and matter came into existence together in creation, the Trinity was present before anything existed. The most incredible thing about all of this is that it means that God does not need creation to exist. He has always been complete. But the big question is, if he needed nothing, why did he choose to create the world and include us in his plan? What did he want to reveal to us by giving us life and placing us in this carefully designed universe? That is what we will now seek to understand. Imagine a programmer creating a complex system. He writes the codes, defines the rules, structures the processes. But here's the detail. The programmer is not inside the code. He exists outside of the system he created, has total control over it, and can interact whenever he wants. In the same way, God created the universe, but he is not bound by it. He is not part of creation. He is the creator. He is not trapped in time. He is the one who established time. He does not depend on matter. He is the one who brought it into existence. Many people try to imagine God as a force within the universe, but that would be like a painter being part of the painting he created. The universe, as grand as it may seem, cannot contain God. He is greater than all that exists because he is the source of all things. If we think carefully, this makes total sense. If God were inside creation, he would also have a beginning and an end, but that would go against his eternal and absolute nature. That is why, when Moses asked God who he was, the answer was simple and direct. I am who I am. And this truth has profound implications. If God is above time and space, it means he does not change. Everything we know is in constant transformation. People age, empires fall, stars die. But God remains the same. He is not affected by what happens in the universe because he is the foundation of all reality. Science shows us how things work, but faith answers why they exist. The big question is not whether God exists, but whether we are willing to recognize the evidence around us. And this is not a new debate. Since ancient times, philosophers have reflected on the need for an eternal creator, but what did they discover? That is what we will explore next. Topic 6. Greek philosophy and religions. Long before modern science, the great philosophers were already asking about the origin of the world and of God. How did everything begin? What existed before time and space? If something exists, then something must have always existed. But what? This question fascinated brilliant minds from ancient Greece, such as Plato, Aristotle, and Heraclitus, who sought to understand the mystery of creation. Faith and reason were never enemies, despite what some claim. In fact, philosophy only reinforces what theology has always affirmed. Something eternal and absolute must exist for everything to make sense. Plato spoke of a world of ideas, where there is a higher and perfect reality that gives shape to our physical world. To him, everything we see here is just an imperfect reflection of a greater truth. Aristotle went even further and proposed the idea of an unmoved mover, a being that was never moved by anything but set everything into motion. Doesn't that sound exactly like what the Bible teaches about God? He was not created. He depends on nothing, and he is the source of everything that exists. Ancient philosophy, unknowingly, was already pointing to an eternal creator, and it was not just the Greeks who reached this conclusion. Religions around the world have always had the idea of a supreme and eternal being who created all things. In Judaism, God reveals himself as I am who I am, Exodus 3:14, indicating that his existence depends on nothing but himself. Christianity reinforces this truth by showing that Christ is the beginning and the end, the one who has always existed. Even in Eastern traditions, such as Hinduism, there is the concept of a supreme being who is unchanging and beyond all things that change and decay. But why is this idea so universal? Why, even in isolated cultures, has there always been a notion of an eternal God? The answer is simple. The existence of God is such an evident truth that it cannot be erased. The Apostle Paul already stated that the evidence of God's existence is in creation itself, Romans 1:20. The universe, life, consciousness, all of these point to a creator. The Greek philosophers and ancient religions did not have access to God's full revelation. but they already sense the need for something greater and eternal. And if the greatest thinkers in human history arrived at this conclusion, what does that mean for us? It means that we are not dealing with an invented or unfounded idea. The universe itself, the greatest minds in history, and the sacred scriptures all point to the same reality. God is eternal, absolute, and the creator of all things. But the issue goes even deeper. If God created everything, then how does human consciousness fit into this mystery? Can our minds fully comprehend something that exists beyond time and space? That is what we will explore next. The human mind is one of the greatest mysteries of creation. Where does consciousness come from? How do we know we exist? Science can explain how the brain functions, how neurons connect, and how electrical impulses generate thoughts, but no one can explain the origin of consciousness itself. Where does this ability to reflect, make decisions, and feel emotions come from? Some try to reduce everything to chemical processes, but are we really just matter? If that were the case, a computer would be capable of thinking and feeling like a human being, but it is not. That's because consciousness is not just a physical phenomenon, it transcends the material world. Now look around you. Everything we see is made up of energy and matter. But what defines the origin of this energy? Science has already proven that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. But if energy cannot emerge from nothing, then where did the first energy come from? This is where we enter the mystery of creation. Before time and space, before the world existed, there was God. And it was He who gave origin to everything, who sustained life, and who granted us the consciousness that makes us unique. The very fact that you are able to reflect on your own existence is proof that something greater is behind it all. Think about this. If we were just matter, how do we explain morality? Why do we know that certain things are right and others are wrong? Why do we have a sense of justice, love, and purpose? Philosophy has been trying to explain this for centuries, but the only coherent answer is that there is an intelligence greater than the universe itself. God. Just as a painting needs a painter, consciousness needs a creator. This paradox leads us to an even deeper reflection, and that is what we're about to explore. If everything has an origin, then who created God? This is a question that many ask, and at first glance, it seems impossible to answer. Human logic teaches us that everything that exists must have a beginning, a starting point. But does this rule apply to everything? If God had been created, then we would need to ask who created the one who created God, and we would be stuck in an infinite cycle with no answer. The truth is that not everything needs an origin. Something has to be eternal. Something has to be independent of time and space. And here is the key point. The universe had a beginning, and that is a fact. The laws of thermodynamics indicate that everything that has a beginning tends to wear out, like a clock that loses energy over time. If the universe had always existed, it would have already run out of energy. In other words, it needed to be caused by something outside of time, and that something is God. God is not a being within time. He is the one who created time. He does not fit into the same rules that govern the physical world. He simply is, without beginning or end. If you think about it, we accept many things without ever questioning their origin. Take energy, for example. Science can measure its effects, predict its behavior, but it still does not know exactly what it is in essence. The same goes for human consciousness. No one can pinpoint where it truly comes from. So why do so many people think that God must have an origin to be real? Some truths are accepted because their effects are undeniable, and the existence of God follows that same logic. The issue is that for many, it is hard to accept something that cannot be measured or precisely explained by science. But have you ever noticed that many of the most important things in life also cannot be measured? love, justice, morality. These are concepts we feel, we experience, but no one can hold them in their hands. Just like these concepts, God is real not because he can be measured, but because his effects are undeniable. The universe, life, order, and purpose are reflections of his existence. So if God had no origin, it means he has always existed before time and space. But this leads us to an even more fascinating point. If the universe is not eternal and God created it, how did he do it? Is science really in conflict with faith, or does science itself confirm this truth? This is a question worth exploring. And that is what we will discuss next. For a long time, people tried to make us believe that science and faith are enemies, as if believing in God were a sign of ignorance rather than knowledge. But the truth is that the greatest mysteries of science point directly to the existence of a creator. The Big Bang itself, which is the most accepted scientific explanation for the origin of the universe, suggests an absolute beginning, something that the Bible had already stated thousands of years ago. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Genesis 1:1. What science calls a cosmic explosion, faith calls the voice of God creating everything out of nothing. Now think with me. Everything that explodes generates chaos and destruction, right? So how could an explosive event have created a perfectly balanced universe with precise laws and interconnected elements? Science tells us that there are cosmic constants that regulate everything: the force of gravity, the speed of light, nuclear interactions. But the slightest alteration in any of these forces would make life impossible. Was this all a product of chance or of an intelligent mind? Logic tells us that order never arises from chaos without an intelligent cause behind it. And here is a detail that few people notice. The very laws of physics prove that the universe cannot be eternal. According to the second law of thermodynamics, everything in the universe is decaying and losing energy. If the cosmos were eternal, it would have already run out of energy. This means that it had a beginning, a moment when everything came into existence. But something that has a beginning must have a cause. Even Albert Einstein felt uncomfortable when his equations showed that the universe had a beginning, because that directly implies the existence of a creator. Moreover, science has never been able to answer a simple question: how did life begin? Evolutionary theories explain the change of species over time, but they cannot explain the origin of life itself. How could non-intelligent chemical elements randomly combine to generate consciousness, emotions, morality, and rational thought? Nothing in biology explains the transition from raw matter to intelligent life, but the Bible gives us this answer clearly. God breathed the breath of life into man, and he became a living being. At the end of the day, science and faith do not contradict each other. They complement each other. Greek philosophers tried to explain this idea centuries ago. Plato and Aristotle, for example, spoke of an unmoved mover, a being that set everything into motion without needing a cause for itself. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, this notion is even more direct. God simply is. He did not emerge at some point in time because time came after him. The Bible reinforces this idea in several passages, such as when God tells Moses, "I am who I am," Exodus 3:14, making it clear that his existence depends on nothing but himself. Imagine that you are writing a book. You, as the author, are not part of the story itself. You exist outside of it, control every detail, and decide the beginning and the end. God is the author of time and space, but he himself is not limited by these things. The physical world has laws, limits, and rules, but God is above all of that. He did not need to be created because he has always existed. It may seem difficult to accept, but in reality, it is more logical than the alternative. If God had an origin, that would mean someone greater than him created him, and that someone would be the real God. The origin of God, therefore, cannot be questioned in the same way we ask about the origin of the universe. The universe had a beginning, and science works tirelessly to understand how that happened. The Big Bang Theory suggests that time, space, and matter had an initial point, meaning they did not exist before. But if there was nothing before, the universe, what could have caused it? Something outside of time and space, something eternal, something that was never created, something like God. This is the great mystery that divides opinions. Some accept this truth by faith, while others seek philosophical and scientific explanations. But the reality is that God's existence does not fit into the categories we use to understand the world. That does not mean it is irrational, quite the opposite. When we examine all the alternatives, it becomes clear that believing in an eternal creator is far more coherent than imagining that the universe came from nothing. After all, nothing can come from nothing. But if God has always existed, how did he bring the world into existence? That is the next great mystery we will explore: God and creation. Everything begins with a simple command that echoes through eternity. Let there be light. In an instant, the void was broken and the world came into existence. God, with his voice, brought order to chaos, creating time, space, and matter in perfect harmony. Creation was not an accident, nor the result of a random process. Every detail was intentional, from the complexity of DNA to the vastness of the cosmos. The fact that we live in a universe filled with logic, beauty, and purpose suggests that someone extremely intelligent and powerful designed it all. And here's something interesting. Science has already discovered that the universe had a beginning, but it cannot explain how or why. The Big Bang Theory suggests a sudden beginning, but that only raises more questions. What caused that initial explosion? Where did the laws that govern the cosmos come from? God not only created everything, but also established the rules that allow life to exist. Gravity, time, energy, atomic forces, everything works with precision. A watch needs a watchmaker. The universe does too. Now think about nature. The cycle of the seasons, the complexity of the human body, the diversity of ecosystems, everything follows a pattern, a balance. Have you noticed that if the Earth were a little closer to the sun, it would be too hot? If it were farther away, it would be too cold. That is not coincidence. It is precise tuning, a true code of divine engineering. If a simple building needs an architect, how could an entire universe exist without a creator? Logic points to a plan, an intention, an intelligence beyond our comprehension. And here's a powerful truth. God created the world, but he is not bound by it. Just as a painter is not part of the painting he creates, God is beyond his creation. The universe does not contain God, but God contains the universe. That explains why he cannot be measured, tested, or limited like everything else we know. If he were subject to the laws he created, he would cease to be God. That means that while we try to understand creation with our finite minds, the reality is that there is so much more beyond what we can perceive. Now think about what this means for your own life. If God created everything with such purpose and balance, do you really think he would make you without a specific purpose? The creation of the world was not an accident, and your existence is not either. There is something he expects from you, something he wants you to understand. But before we get to that, there's a question that challenges all our certainties. If everything has an origin, then who created God? Have you ever stopped to think about what existed before time, before space, before the universe itself? This is a question that has intrigued the human mind since the dawn of philosophy. If everything has an origin, then what is the origin of God? How can something exist without ever having been created? This question divides opinions, confuses brilliant minds, and challenges the logic of our material world. But what if the answer is right before us? Many believe that science and faith are opposites, but what if it's the other way around? What if the most modern scientific discoveries only confirm what the Bible has been saying for thousands of years? What can physics, philosophy, and the very structure of the universe teach us about the existence of an eternal creator? Has God always existed, or did he have a beginning? And if he has always existed, what was he doing before creation? These are questions that few dare to answer, but they hold profound truths about the meaning of life and our purpose in this world. This is one of those topics that can shake certainties, but also open our eyes to a reality greater than we can imagine. Get ready for a journey that goes beyond what human senses can perceive, beyond the limitations of space-time. Because understanding the origin of God is not just a theological issue, it's about understanding the very origin of everything. If you want to know what really happened before creation, if you want to explore the mystery behind the existence of all things, then stay with me, because this answer could completely change the way you see the world. Have you ever imagined a time before time and a space before space? It sounds impossible, doesn't it? But this is the starting point for understanding the origin of God. Before the creation of the world, before any matter or energy existed, there was only him. The concept is so profound that it defies human logic itself. We are used to measuring everything through time, counting seconds, days, years. But what if time didn't always exist? Even space, this infinite vastness we know, had a beginning. So how do we conceive of something or someone who has always existed without ever being created? Think about this. When you throw an object into the air, it needs space to move and time to complete its trajectory. But what if there were no space or time? Everything we know would lose all meaning. Science says the universe had a beginning, the famous Big Bang. But what existed before that? The great truth is that before the world was formed, God already was. His existence does not depend on time, space, or matter. He does not need a place to exist because he is the very origin of existence. The human mind struggles to grasp this reality because we are bound by the limitations of the physical world. However, clues to this truth are everywhere. Consider this. A computer does not create itself, right? It needs a programmer, but the programmer is not inside the computer. He is external, superior, and his knowledge transcends the system he created. That is how God relates to the universe. He's not part of creation because he is prior to everything. And then comes the question that burns in many minds. How can something exist without having been created? Our brains automatically think in terms of beginnings and ends, but if everything had an origin, then even the concept of origin would need a greater cause. This is precisely where philosophy and faith intersect. If God had been created, who would have created the Creator? The problem with this question is that it assumes God is part of creation, when in fact he is the author of all existence. Think about it. If something had a beginning, it needed a reason to exist. But if God had no beginning, it means he needs no reason. He simply is. This is the difference between everything we know and God. The world needs a creator, but God is the very essence of creation. His power is not measured by time or matter because he existed before any of these elements were even created. What does this mean in practice? It means that trusting in him is not a blind leap in the dark, but the most logical thing anyone can do. And if this already sounds grand, the next question takes us even deeper. If God had no origin, how can we understand his existence? Get ready, because we are now diving into the ultimate mystery, the origin of God. Now comes the question that leaves many perplexed. What is the origin of God? It almost seems contradictory to ask this, since the idea of God is that of an eternal being, with no beginning and no end. But the human mind insists on looking for a starting point for everything. After all, we live in a world where everything has a beginning, whether it's the birth of a child, the founding of a city, or the creation of a new technology. But when we talk about God, we step into a realm that completely defies our sense of logic and understanding.